Now, NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio with Lee Witting, whether you're listening on TalkZone, by podcast, through the archives of our ad-free shows on our YouTube channel, or connected through our Facebook page. 2 weeks ago, our country celebrated Juneteenth, marking the end of slavery in America. This week, we celebrate the 4th of July, when, with America's Declaration of Independence, we began our journey from a kingship form of government to evolving a democracy. This move toward individual freedom by George Washington and other founding fathers was in line with God's observation to Samuel more than 2,000 years earlier, that when the people demand a king instead of rule by love and law, they are actually replacing government based on consideration of others with rule by one ego-driven human, often a self-serving male. The people of Israel demanded a king, despite God's warning, and rule by kingship prevailed, for the most part, right up till the American Revolution. Here's that Bible passage describing God's warning from 1 Samuel chapter 8, verses 4 through 20. All the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them out of the land of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly, and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." And then God listed what kings do, including starting wars of conquest and using the nation's children as cannon fodder in the fighting, forcing the men to farm and the women to cook, seizing the best lands from the owners and giving it to the king's favorites, seizing a tenth of what the people produce and giving that to his favorites. So God tells Samuel, "Warn them, you yourselves will become the king's slaves." And God concluded, "When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel heard all that the people said, he repeated it before the Lord, and the Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." God warns us, but he gives us the free choice to make bad decisions. On the 4th of July every year, Americans celebrate having made the right choice this time, based on the God-given democratic notion that all men and women are created equal with the right under law to be free. That's based on the truth that we are all equally loved by our Creator. That's why we established the nation unbound by any specific religious dogma. We are meant to be a safe home for citizens of all religious inclinations. To quote the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Sadly, few so-called Christian nationalists today understand that God's love favors the freedom of choice our society provides and opposes arbitrary enslavement by dictators. For example, their drive these days to post the 10 Commandments in grade school classrooms, ordering second and third graders to prioritize religion's various names for God and also not to covet their neighbor's wife or ox, that would be better spent on posting a list of the duties God expects of us. Our love is expressed, according to Matthew chapter 25, 35 to 36, when, as individuals and by community action, as Jesus said, "I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Lord Acton wrote, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And a dictator attended on by his fearful yes men is absolute power indeed." America's founding fathers worked hard to establish a government tempered by a balance of governmental powers. For some 250 years, their goal has been an inspiration to us and an inspiration to citizens in most other countries. That's why so many people are at our borders every day, clamoring to get in. By failing to teach our history to every generation, dictators in waiting will exploit people's ignorance with fear and lies and seize the democratic powers of the people for their own ends. Just as God warned Samuel, free people governed by law can become slaves again, forced to serve the king instead of being free to love God and one another. Let's take a look for a moment at what near-death experiences teach us about how society works best. NDEs teach us it was God's intention from the beginning to give us free will, even if it meant we would make wrong choices, such as choosing to be ruled by a dictator, rather than the shared well-being that democracy makes possible. But knowing that dictatorship inevitably turns out badly, we should not start down that slippery road again. So let's look at what NDEs teach about how the other side suggests we live. When near-death experiencers are told they must come back here, it often makes no sense to us. Why go back to a broken body when here in heaven it's so loving, so perfect? But NDEers are often told they have not yet accomplished what they came here to do, to practice love by helping others. Then they understand, though they may not remember what their specific calling is when they're back in their body. But clearly, NDEs tell us we are here not for frivolous reasons, but on an assignment we gave ourselves to channel God's love into this world. Second, we often think, well, who are we to be doing God's work on earth? Well, near-death experiences demonstrate we vibrate and respond to the same love as the light is. It becomes obvious when we cross to the other side. We feel that love and know that we have come home. So if we're made of the same vibration as God, then our duty is to live our essence. That is, to live what Jesus called the greatest commandment. "Teacher," he was asked, "which is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets." That understanding made perfectly clear to near-death experiencers. So whatever the various personal assignments we've chosen for our lives, every one of us is called to embody that love in one way or another. To quote the Talmud, "You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." Of course, we can choose to abandon it, but remember God's warning to the people of Israel. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. Like the story of Adam and Eve implies, our choices have consequences. Today, we take a look at one of the most difficult accomplishments ever piled on one person's shoulders. That is Abraham Lincoln's assignment to end slavery in America, even at the cost of a civil war that nearly destroyed the country. If you want a clue that God loves America's democratic union, you may find it in this story from the Library of Congress, that Abraham Lincoln had an NDE with a vision and a message from the spirit of George Washington. In that experience, Lincoln was told to believe a dream Washington sent to General George McClellan that mapped the positions of the Southern forces. So let me read that story to you and see what you think. It begins, How the following strange and mysterious affair has got out, it matters not for the present to be stated. But it is a well-known fact that for some time past, the national capital, and especially the White House, has been the theater of certain very mysterious and unaccountable occurrences. What connection these have had with the tremendous events which are now convulsing the nation must become at once apparent to all from a perusal of the succeeding facts. On the afternoon previous to the day on which General Hooker so suddenly left Falmouth Station for Washington, and subsequent, of course, to his defeat by Robert E. Lee, President Lincoln, while in his private cabinet, became the subject of one of the most startling manifestations of the supernatural that has ever taken place, at least within late years. It is well known that the cool, stern temperament of the president forbids the belief that he would become the victim of mere superstition. What importance he therefore attached to the occurrence may be inferred from this. The next day, a prominent, though not very popular member of the cabinet, and the general to whom we have referred, were closeted with the president, and after a somewhat prolonged interview, the latter narrated the mysterious occurrence of the afternoon before. "Gentlemen," said he, "you doubtless remember that just after the arrival of General McClellan at the Capitol here in July 1861, it is said he had a most remarkable dream in which Washington appeared to him in the spirit. And through the influence of the latter, he beheld the whole of the territory then in rebellion laid out as though it had been a chart. Still under the guidance of the same influence, the sleeping general, with a pencil, hurriedly noted upon a map lying before him all the rebel fortifications, positions of troops, and so forth, that he beheld spread out upon the vast chart over which he looked. As he illustrated his strange task, he beheld masses of the enemy being put in motion toward Washington so as to effect its capture. He thereupon awoke, and casting his eyes over the map on which he dreamed he had been marking, he saw, to his astonishment, that he had really filled in with pencil marks and signs, making it, in fact, a duplicate of the scene he had beheld in his slumber. So impressed was he with the idea that he had been the object of influence from the other world, that he hastened out couriers to the point threatened, who found that the enemy was really there in great force, exactly as he had noted in his dream. "Did you ever see that map which General McClellan is said to have thus drawn while sleeping, and about which there had been so much said?" General Hooker asked Lincoln. "No, I never have. But I am convinced that such a map is in existence, and that it is now in the possession of General McClellan." "Well, Mr. Lincoln," said the secretary in his bombastic manner, "you doubtless have good reasons for this belief, and if consonant with your pleasure and judgment, will you inform us what they are?" "I don't know that it is necessary," replied the president, "to go into any explanatory detail, Mr. Secretary, in regard to the matter. But I will narrate to you a very mysterious manifestation that occurred yesterday to myself. Before proceeding with it, however, I will just remind you that for some time past, so many events of a supernatural character have taken place, not only in this city, but here in this very building, that public interest has at last been centered upon the subject. Yesterday afternoon, as I was sitting alone in my private room, I felt the strangest sensation coming over me that I ever experienced in my life. To dissipate it, I got up from the lounge on which I was half reclining and stepped briskly back and forth in the chamber. But the more I strove to drive it off, the stronger became the hold of the feeling upon me, and at last I found myself obliged to sit down. The thought immediately entered my mind that I was becoming paralyzed, and I made an effort to reach the bell, but before I had half stretched my arm, it sank powerless at my side, as though it stuck by a flash of lightning. I next endeavored to call for help, but with equal futility. At this instant, although I was alone, I felt a hand passed so slowly across my eyes that I could distinctly feel from the touch of the thumb and fingers thereof that it was the right hand. This motion had not stopped ere I seemed to die. or rather to experience that separation of the spirit from the body, which we have been taught to call death or dissolution. Accompanying this, a gentle twilight surrounded me in place of the glare of day, and I could see abroad in all directions for an immense distance. Throughout this immensity of space, I distinguished living beings flitting about like clouds shaped in the human form. I remember that I did not until now feel any astonishment at my new situation, but rather a feeling of expectancy, or perhaps inquiry is the word which best described it. Presently, the light became stronger and stronger, until it far exceeded that of the sun, and I heard a voice saying in tones that the deepness and solemnity of which language cannot describe, "Servant of the Republic, hast thou done well?" These words I knew were directed to me, and yet I could not answer. But as I gazed in awe before me, there seemed to gradually develop itself the figure of a heavenly being, gigantic in stature and with the mien of an angel. This being fastened my attention, and as I looked upon him, his features became plainer and plainer until finally I recognized him as Washington, the great founder of our republic. I could not avert my eyes from that glorious countenance, even had I wished. "Servant of the Republic," again spoke the Spirit, fixing his eyes upon me, "look abroad and tell me what thou seest." At this, all the countries of the earth suddenly seemed to be spread out before me in the same manner as McClellan described that America was laid out before him. And I answered, "I see Poland convulsed, and thousands of her sons fighting with their oppressors, and I see many nations groaning in bonds and praying for delivery, but they are divided, and therefore they are still oppressed. Servant of the Republic, it is a lesson, but look abroad again and tell me what thou seest." I see the rebellious states of America. They have hedged themselves in with strong forts. They plow up their fields and plant corn. Foreign ships bring the munitions of war. They marshal immense armies. Each house sends forth its warriors. Their mothers and wives and sisters part with them with smiles and words of cheer and deck them like sacrifices for some holy altar. They are united and move as one man. Servant of the Republic, this is thy work. But look abroad again and tell me what thou seest. I see the loyal states of America. They also rush to the fray. Stalwart men and pale-faced boys range themselves about their banner. Mothers and wives and sisters send them forth with fond kisses and tears of joy to do their duty by their country. Nobly they hasten to meet the foe. Like the whirlwind of the desert, they sweep to the contest. But as they meet the shock of battle, alas, they are divided and they recoil. Again they rally, and again, like true heroes, they bleed and die, but still divided, always divided. Failure meets them always. Alas, they now hesitate, and murmurs come from their lips. Servant of the Republic, said the Spirit, this is thy work. But look abroad yet again and tell me what thou seest. I see the armies of the Union shattered and broken and driven back continually. Nobly they fight, and still more nobly they die. But fate is against them, and they are even made to defend their own firesides from the exultant foe. I see also a soldier of the Union seated in his household like one banished from his country and mourning for her ills. All eyes are turned upon him, and all hearts seem to yearn toward him, but his enemies fear and hate him, and try to persuade all to become his foes. Servant of the Republic, repeated the Spirit, this is thy work. But look abroad yet once more, and tell me what thou seest. I see the banished soldier of the Union, George McClellan, leave his household, gird on his sword once more, and go forth to battle. Heaven blesses him, and he drives back the foe in slaughter and despair, He pursues them. They are within his grasp. But once more his enemies prevail and drag him back to banishment. Servant of the Republic, this is thy work. But look abroad yet once again and tell me what thou seest. I see our army once more driven back to the defense of their own firesides by the hosts of the enemy who press forward with the fierceness of revenge to ravage and destroy. And once more the nation's eyes are bent toward the banished soldier of the Union. Once more that terribly solemn spirit voice spoke to me again, saying, Servant of the Republic, this is thy work. But good is still within thy grasp. And if thou walk aright and leave the crooked paths into which thou hast suffered thyself to go, all will yet be well and the unity of the Republic preserved. Restored to the army on which alone depends the life of the Republic, its former leader, he has been peculiarly assisted from the other world in a dream, and his arm is all-powerful to save the life of the Republic in the fearful peril that it is about to come upon her. At this moment, I awoke suddenly and found myself still sitting exactly as I had placed myself when the strange feeling came over me. Certainly a strange dream or vision this, said the secretary as the narrator concluded. Very strange indeed. And besides being so very strange, Mr. President, added Hooker, it is highly complimentary to every general but McClellan. Well, gentlemen, replied the president to these remarks of his companions, I have certainly hitherto allowed my judgment to be led by others until now. It is almost impossible for me to have my own way in anything. And it is only when public opinion unmistakably expresses itself that I am able to do anything fully consonant with my own feelings. I am not superstitious, but the occurrence that I have just narrated has left such a strong impression upon my mind that it amounts almost to a conviction that the enemy is maturing plans by which, in spite of our strength, we shall be forced again to defend our own capital. The president and his secretary in general, after some little further conversation, parted, each resolving, no doubt, to prove by accomplishing facts that the vision amounted to nothing more than a vision. The rebel invasion, however, has proved that the president was not the subject of a mere dream, and now to carry out the role it only requires the unmistakable expression of public opinion to enable President Lincoln, in spite of the enemies of our country, to recall General George B. McClellan to the head of the Army of the Union. All will then be well indeed. And here the account ends. Now, I'm no student of the history of the Civil War, but it seems General McClellan's early successes in raising the Army of the Potomac and as commanding general of the U.S. Army went to his head. In July 1861, McClellan wrote to his wife, By some strange operation of magic, I seem to have become the power of the land. Well, a side note here, by some strange operation of magic, that might refer to that prophetic dream he had, showing the locations for him to attack. Anyway, he went on to write, I almost think that were I to win some small success now, I could become dictator or anything else that might please me. But nothing of that kind would please me, therefore I won't be dictator. And then he says, admirable self-denial. He wrote that in 1861, and in 1864 he actually ran against Abe Lincoln for the presidency. But his early success in the war had faded in light of his later confrontations with General Robert E. Lee of the South, and Lincoln had learned to mistrust McClellan. Perhaps more significantly, McClellan never achieved the understanding Lincoln showed in freeing the slaves. So I can't say the story of McClellan's dream and George Washington's NDE visit to Lincoln affected the war so much as it might have inspired Lincoln's heart to declare the Emancipation Proclamation. McClellan, on the other hand, remained pretty much a racist. God suggests, but leaves the choices we make up to us. My only other observation is that the celebration of Juneteenth, so close to the 4th of July, helps remind us of the lofty goals our democracy still aspires to. Well, thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear this show again or any of our more than 500 archived ad-free NDE interviews, go to TalkZone's NDE Radio site and hit the Past Shows button, or go to our YouTube channel, NDE Radio with Lee Witting, where you can subscribe to and comment on the complete NDE Radio library. And be sure to check out our NDE Radio Facebook page. Just search NDE Radio with Lee Witting on your Facebook app. And listen next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern at TalkZone, for more NDE Radio. I'm your host, Lee Witting, saying thanks for listening.